My name is Mariana. I'm from Digital Communication Network, and I'm super excited for this virtual discussion. This event is co-organized by the Digital Communication Network Southeast Europe Hub and World Learning. DCN-SCE is supported by the US Department of State Office of Citizen Exchanges. And today's discussion is part of DCN-SCE's Ideas in Action, is a series of virtual events launched in the context of the COVID-19 crisis. But thanks to your interest and your very positive feedback, we continue to invite distinguished speakers from all over the world in order to discuss topics that concern all of us. Either we are journalists, digital creators, communicators, or people who try to find our voice in this new digital era. And what's the best way to find our voice? I think it's obviously to share our stories. As you know, storytelling is as ancient as our world. But the crazy and the very interesting thing is that it's a trending topic until nowadays. Think about your favorite brand or the media outlet you trust for your daily information, or even an organization you follow. You will see that every successful brand has a story that inspires and connects. And the fact is that even if storytelling is timeless, digital storytelling changes. And that's why today we invited digital storytelling experts who will discuss and share with us strategies and tools for sharing impactful stories that connect and engage digital audience. Before I introduce our wonderful speakers, I would like to remind you that you can post your questions on the chat room in order to be answered by our experts. So, on today's panel, I have the honor to have with me three wonderful ladies. I will start with a very valuable DCN member and a great speaker, Lizzy. She is a high-performance coach for leaders, brands, and athletes, and she is from Estonia. My dearest Lizzy, I'm so happy that you are here today with us, and I would like to share with you a story of the first time I've watched you on stage. It was on DCN conference in Bucharest, and I remember very vividly that you asked the audience several questions, and if someone won, you gave them chocolates. And I also remember how excited I was and motivated after your speech. And I think, again, I remember again Maya Angelou's quote that people will forget what you said. Maybe people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that it's very characteristic about you. I would like to welcome you and to give you the turn. The turn is yours now.
Wow, after that kind of introduction, I'm speechless. Can we leave it at that? Because you already mentioned so many important keywords about storytelling and impact, and how actually what we're talking about today is timeless. And my speech will kind of be timeless and not be so much on the digital. And I'm trying also at the same time share the screen. I'm not a good multitasker. I hope it's there. So when I was preparing, I was thinking about life as a story. We do think that digital era or age is somewhat different, and sure, as we will see today probably as well, it has its differences, but the need for us to share what we go through, what we feel as persons, first of all, and then as brands or products or services or visions or ideals that we promote or values that are important for us. This is the story we want to tell, be it as a representative of an organization or just being a person who is, trying to live his or her life in this weird, wacky life that we've seen also this year very, very strongly. So unfortunately, I won't be giving you chocolate today, but when you come to Estonia, please do come and visit me, and I will give you a chocolate when you have been here and use the keyword Mariana. You will get the chocolate. But what I do suggest, what you would think during these 10 minutes that I have the floor, is to think about yourself first and foremost, because I am firstly a psychologist, or trying to support the freedom of each person. And then through this liberty that we have, I believe that we are much better ambassadors, visionaries. So when I'm talking this and sharing my own experience and my story, actually think about yourself. So I'm very pro being selfish at some times. So please be that. And I do hope you have a lot of questions to ask later on. My way from personal branding to performance enhancement coaching with what I've done the last 12 years, and probably more, as far as I remember myself being in somewhat conscious person. I've always had this need to do actually all of those things that I'm for the achiever, to be vibrant and kind of active, and to support people. And the quick story of my life and why I'm here actually today is that when I started off in my career, in my life, I started as a communication manager, and I got to IT company, which is high-paced, constant changes. We never know what happens the next day, a lot of failures. And I truly believed about, living 110%. And at the same time, I was figuring out what personal brand is. And for me, though we're talking about personal brand as marketing, and using these changes and crises to kind of promote your own products, then for me it was freedom of choice. And that freedom also meant a lot of work to be ready that things change. The stories of Kodak or IBM that, at some point they were so big that they were so ignorant that changes are coming, the crisis for them is coming. And for some other people who noticed that, they won. So as a person yourself in your career, or as a professional, you always have to kind of be this achiever to see further than today's moment. And unfortunately, this kind of thinking also gets you in trouble. You burn out easily. So that's what happened to me. And I took a lot of time off and went to Ibiza. And not to party, I walked. For 1 year, I walked like 70, 80 kilometers per week, and, doing this and that, and doing actually absolutely nothing. And what I learned from that is that you really need to focus on few things in your life. And that will give you the clarity, and that will give you the focus you need to be really good at things. And that will also help you see the variety of your own expert field, wherever you are. It will help you learn many things that are still relevant. And after a year, I got tired, and I became a supporter for athletes, and in general, what I'm striving to do now is to help all people looking for this freedom of expression, freedom to live in the change that we have now so expressed, to figure out where their skills lie, where their values lie, where this relevancy lies, what is really impactful, and to support them with psychological skills, this mental game. You've heard athletes say like it's 90% mental game. And I think in every profession, whether you are the individual working in a field or you are this representative, you have to have the mental edge. And I think this year the COVID showed this very clearly. So now I'm working more on game plan strategies, helping athletes and businesses, brands to get these strategies via communication and psychology. And one of the questions for the speakers was about, your favorite outlets in digital. And for me, from 2008, I think I was the first one to be a blogger in Estonia. Maybe I'm just taking too much credit, but I'm selfish today as well. So yeah, I started talking about branding, which was completely new thing. Career, freedom of choice, that you choose your employer, and that pissed some employers off. But I think that's quite relevant in the change time, that we take this challenge to find our own outlet that is suitable for us. So when the crisis happened, this COVID, I was actually extremely happy, and not because the crisis and all the health crisis that was here and the people who suffered from it, but as I'm a person who likes working in crisis situations, I was involved in quite many strategic communication strategies. And the first thing I noticed why these companies were in trouble was because they hadn't worked out why they as a team really are there. They knew their vision or their kind of the strategic plan, but they really didn't get it in deep roots. And my work was to figure out each individual's idea and the organizations, put these two together. And then when this is done, the marketing part and choosing the channels was not so difficult anymore. So when we think about the next crises, the next issues we might have, or we don't know that might happen, then it's so important to be aware of where you are in knowing why what you do is relevant to you at first, because this is what gives you resilience and mental strength to go through as a storyteller, as a marketer, as a professional. Because if you're not there, if you're not ready, if you're tired, and when the crisis hits, the first thing you want to do is hide, then you're not going to get any stories across. So for me, these two things are so combined. So I understand if these seem a bit different, but I think this is so relevant to understand this today. So yeah, to know yourself, why you are working with what you're working, and then also figuring out and being very knowledgeable of where you are with what the company does or your brand or product does, kind of in balance with the clients or the environment or whatever is these target groups and the people around for whom you're doing things. So if your message is important and your organization is important and your why is important and this is known to you, the hard part is kind of getting it out there, to finding the words to say and to finding the channels to say them through. But what I've noticed is that I gave you some links as well. Sorry, I'm just stepping in here in my own speech. I put some links. One of them is something I created when the crisis started for people to kind of quickly get the focus back on what they need to do in their own brands or careers or work. So their links will be, I hope, with the slides later on. But what makes a good personal story, and just to remind you, for me, everything is personal, and you can't have an organization with individuals understanding the whole story. So where does the messages become clear and easily understood that every organization, we are saying something and they will exactly understand. And having worked with hundreds of business owners, from lawyers to marketers to scientists to artists, what I've noticed that they come, they say they need to have a story and they need to have a marketing plan, but they don't really want to do that because they don't have the confidence. They know they are expert, they know their product is valuable, but they kind of have this fear. And there's usually two kinds of fears. One is fear because the choice doesn't feel right, For example, there are many people coming, oh, I need to be in Facebook. So they start from marketing. And when that happens and they feel like this channel is not the right channel, usually they're right. And they start from the wrong kind of angle in the first place. But when the fear is that the fear itself that maybe they don't want my product, maybe what I say is not kind of clever enough, or I'm not smart enough, or maybe we're not just ready with this, product yet, it's not perfect, right? So we hold on to this constant improvement, and we never get to performance. We never really, show what we can do. So what you work on is really understanding where you are in the product or your message. And when you get down to business, and when you ask the people, or when you start asking yourself, like, okay, now if you talk to yourself or to a normal person, what it is that you do, like what is important, why is it important to you, like start just really small, or whatever is in your head. I see people just opening up. They're just giving me so much content, when they stop thinking about marketing, because they have this thing that it has to be in some form. The form comes after. So the form comes after in a way that you might not be ready for sometimes. So you need to understand the crowd. Of course, I mean, if people here are marketers, you have the target groups, and you have to position yourself. You know all this, right? So it is figure outable if you really understand where you're getting at. And this is the part there marketers usually leave behind, because they don't have the questions. They don't know how to ask the questions that really get the inner emotions, what makes the emotion, right? So I would suggest working on this first part, like what is it? What is the product? Why are you doing it in the first place? What's the value in there? Really using the common words, or what really happens in life. And this marketing is, if you start talking out something, if you start presenting yourself, you will always present yourself in a way that is in your head. So as you see, I'm getting this performance coach in me out here in marketing, because I think it's so relevant. What we talk in our head, and what we think or believe that the others want to hear, that comes out of us. So when you're very confident and you know where you are, self-talk becomes also much nicer. You're nicer to yourself and more confident. That's straight away more motivational to anyone who's going to listen to, even if they don't care, or if they don't understand the product. So long-term game plan. There are things that change our plan, our strategies, but the vision should usually not change. And this goes really back to why your product was launched. What is the essence of it? So I'm just running circles around the same topic, but saying it in a different way, because it is the same thing. And long-term plan. The fear is that, if we fail in some stage, then the plan is wrong. But it's just a stage. It's just a stop. COVID happened. It can actually give you new ideas, new ways. And if you see it as a positive thing, you can learn, and you can make your vision, your long-term plan, actually workable even better. So for me, again, I realized how well I work in crisis, and it gave me another edge, another reason, another clarity, what I need to do in my vision or in my work. So you have to build in your plan or in your stories, the failures, miscalculations, and just accept them, that they will happen. And your stories don't have to be perfect. I've written so many motivation letters for other people, so many bios, LinkedIn, these first pages, and blogs, and help them kind of style the blog. And one thing I never do is take away the style of a person. I love grammatic mistakes. I love weird sentences because that's what makes them them. And that brings me to, again, this notion that if you feel it's important to say, if your story has an impact, that's the story you want to tell, no matter how imperfect it is. This is the one that actually makes an effect. I'm really bad at grammar. My sentences are long because I love English, and Estonian language is not that. And I've got a lot of criticism for writing very bad blog posts in language-wise, but I always get the clients who come always say like, I read this and this rang a bell, I had this thing, bling, 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 you know what I'm saying. And these are the clients I want. So of course you have a difference. If your story goes out to thousands and thousands, it might be more generic, and you might use SEO to kind of move this around. But if your clientele, or if the crowd you're trying to change or impact is more narrow or more specific, then the more you are, the more the better probability that you get the right clients. So brings me to number 5. These are actually the steps you can kind of use to create your own stories or prepare for them. Unique is the new normal. So we're kind of thinking that if you're unique, that means there's just a handful of you. Digital era kind of gives us the openness of millions of people. So this uniqueness, and I'm sorry to say you are unique, but you're not unique anymore, because there are hundreds and thousands of people who might think just like you in some, field, in some way. And you see a lot of stories in Snapchat or in Facebook or blogs that bring out the, hair in under armpits, that this is kind of unique now. All these stories, these weird stories that we think they happen. So you kind of need to stick to your uniqueness and be ready that there is a crowd waiting for you to share that. So I want to share one slide or just my personal favorite PR or salesperson or marketer, Ogilvy, who says that there is no, well, he didn't actually say that because he's dead already, but he's just someone to, if you're a marketer, please find Ogilvy and their content. It's really awesome. There's no such thing as digital marketing or digital advertising. It's just good marketing and good advertising. And I think it's the same with storytelling. It's just stories. And then you figure out the digital part of it. That's the basis. So for the last thing, I wanted to give you that you can think for yourself, but I noticed that I'm stealing time from other people. So you can just take a snapshot of this, this slide here. And this is what I want you to think, when this thing is over, this 1 hour, just take 5 minutes and see how you can put your own kind of hashtags here for your product or your own personal brand or the company or vision you're working with. The 2 things I want you to remember is about you. Like, do you know who you are in essence? The why, the vision, the style you have, and do you actually let it out? And the second thing is the emotion. As actually, this is nice that Mariana, you started with that. What do you want to? What do you want people to feel when you interact with them? What do you want them to kind of think, and what do you want them to do afterwards? So my purpose has always been that when you see me or when you interact with me, usually I don't want you to actually remember me, but I want you to notice that you learned something about yourself and you have something to kind of do for the next 24 hours. Usually when I have consultation, it's 6 months that they might not even come and close to me anymore because they have so much content to work with. So the emotion you want to attract, to give, is something you can prepare and something you should start from. And this is something I also did when I was a communication manager. You know, when you hire a designer, for example, for leaflet or a logo, I never told them what to do. Like, okay, put this image or this or that thing, even if it's a photographer. I told them what kind of emotions I want to get. What kind of feel does it have to have? And I always got what I wanted, because then you have the creative mind working with the same, you know, essence, not with the visual. I might have one idea, but they might have completely different idea. But the emotion, if you direct it through that, it's much easier. So remember that you can elicit emotions, and what could, you know, help you do that. So I leave you with these 4 letters, your time to shine. I think crisis also taught me one thing, that when you know your why, you also know when to shut up. Many brands started talking too much, started taking advantage of these hard moments for many people. And that was just obnoxious, and it was not nice. And I don't think it helped the brand. Yeah, maybe visibility. We all know news hacking, but you have to know when to shine outside and when to shine inside. So work on that. And from me, that's all. I love questions. I love feedback. So do please give me some emails. And if you want to read more about my blog, which has from Ibiza walking to cats and business, and now high performance blogs, not the right way to do a blog, then just drop by. Thank you. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Lizzy.
Thank you.
Great presentation as always. I have already a question for you. What type of skills are needed in order to write or deliver stories in the digital age through digital networks versus the previous ways of telling stories with impact? Do we have to obtain some certain skills nowadays?
I think one thing that has, and many of you probably agree, is that shorter the better. But this is not actually a new thing. If you go back to journalism, and when I studied journalism, it was always, you know, when you can take away more words, that's better. So as I actually finished, you know, we want to talk so much, me included, and it's actually, or how many letters have to be in one status update or things like that. And I encourage you to figure out what works for you. So I think one thing is less is more in this sense, not a new concept. Being aware of the emotional impact it has, how the tone we use, we can write or say so many different things, but when the emotion is different, either it has this, people won't understand it, or they will get the emotion and they forget the words. So understanding the emotion is the second thing, like not what you feel, but others feel as well. So I said that be selfish, but when you're getting it out there, it's always good to get the feedback and to be open to criticism, but still making the decision of whether the criticism comes from the right people for you or your business, or they're just critical just for the fact of it. For example, the grammar. Grammar is not so important anymore. So first, I mean, it's better to write than not to write. But again, constraint, maybe it helps.
Okay, I will keep, I have a lot of quotes, like if the story has an impact, that's the story you have to share. And I will keep this, it's your time to shine, because I like it. And now I'm going to another topic, maybe the most trending format of digital storytelling these days is storytelling through audio. In other words, podcasts that are more popular than ever. I have some statistics. Over 55% of the US population have listened to a podcast, and in 22, over 155 million people listen to a podcast every week. Also, there are over 700,000 active podcasts and 29 million podcast episodes available. So in this, now I would like to invite Daphne Karnesis, the founder and the director at the Greek Podcast Project, in order to give us more hints about podcasts. Daphne, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you very much. I don't have a lovely visual presentation or slides like Lizzy, but maybe it's more fitting because, as you said, my work is more focused on audio. So I'm a journalist and podcast producer based here in Athens. I'm Greek, but I studied and worked in the UK for 10 years. So while I was in London, I worked for print, radio, television. I briefly worked at BBC Radio. I was a producer at Bloomberg Television, where I worked on one of their morning shows. And most recently, I worked for Monocle magazine. It's a monthly publication where I wrote articles and interviewed people from architects and designers, authors, entrepreneurs, but also I worked on various podcasts for Monocle. And I was actually writing and reporting on Greece a lot, about its cultural scene here and about the sort of revival that the country I guess is having after the crisis and this new generation of creatives coming back to Greece. And it was really last summer in 2019 that I realized, I love my job, but I felt like there was more I could do if I was actually here in Greece. Particularly, I think, when it comes to the media sort of and content ecosystem, which I think in Greece is a bit more focused at the moment on, churning out stories, fast news. It's a lot more about speed and headlines. So earlier this January, I decided to start my own podcast production company. As you said, it's called the Greek Podcast Project. And I kind of started at a time when podcasts were still relatively new in Greece, and people had kind of just started to figure out, I guess, what the distinction is with radio. It's one of the questions that I guess get asked a lot in Greece. And I think one of my favorite parts of the process has been assembling my team. I work with other journalists, producers, sound engineers, marketing experts. And I've really seen since I've started the company that there is a lot of appetite in Greece for something creative, something more dynamic. So I essentially started the company about 2.5 months before the pandemic. And thankfully, things have been very busy so far.
Perfect. Why do you think that podcasts are so popular globally?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. I'd say there's 3 main reasons. Firstly, just to tell about myself on a personal level, having been listening to podcasts for many years, they're kind of a constant companion in my day-to-day, certainly when I was in London, on the tube, commuting, tidying the house, cooking. And unlike, when you're watching a YouTube video, for example, where you have to be in front of your laptop, we tend to listen to podcasts in the very kind of intimate moments of our day, while still being engaged, be it cooking or cleaning the house. So on a basic level, it is about convenience in part. And I think the second thing is that within the podcast ecosystem, as you said, it's growing so much. So there is really something for everyone. One of my favorite podcasts is a design podcast called 99% Invisible. I also listen to literature podcasts or daily news podcasts. So there's just a lot of high quality audio coming out, which I think brings me on to the third point, which is this, I think, really fitting what we're talking about now, which is the storytelling aspect. I think there is great scope within podcasts for that storytelling aspect, because unlike radio, where you just have to get the audio out there, with podcasts, because they aren't live by their very nature, you have time to work on the audio, to polish it, to bring it to life in creative ways. I mean, you might be listening to a podcast that's 30 minutes long, but actually behind that there might be 10 hours worth of editing. And, for example, one of my favorite style of podcasts, the narrative podcasts, the way that they unfold the story step by step, scene by scene, instead of, just presenting the facts, they use multiple voices, sound clips, music, almost like audio documentaries. So podcasts are very selective in the content that they end up using, and they're very polished. And I think the audience is much more engaged because they've literally downloaded that specific podcast on that specific topic because it is something that they're very interested in.
Can you tell me if someone from the participants or from us wants to begin podcasting, what's the process, let's say, about the equipment, about the platforms that they are best for promoting or distributing our work? Tell us some hints, let's say, if we want to start podcasting.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, anyone can start, really. And I mean, that's one of the nice things about podcasts, is they're quite democratic even. But for me, I think before sort of the practical aspects, I think it's important for anyone who wants to start a podcast to kind of scope out the rest of the market and try and understand what they're offering, because it's such a crowded, sector. So I think if you want to start a successful podcast, it's quite important to find your niche, whether that's the subject matter or whether that's, the type of questions that you ask, if it's an interview-based podcast, for example, and really what can make yours stand out. And then I think early on, it's also good to think about, if you're doing it alone, because at the Greek Podcast Project, we work, we take on producing, creating, developing podcasts for companies and other brands. But I think your question is more about the individual level. I think for an individual, it's good to sort of start thinking early on about who can sponsor it, even if it's just, the money to cover your expenses, like the recording equipment, as you said. Maybe there is a brand or organization that fits with the theme of your podcast that can at least cover those expenses. And so the practical stuff, to record the podcast, if you're going to be recording at home, one thing that I always say is that the recording equipment that you use is only really as good as the space that you're in. So, if someone is going to be doing it at home, as a lot of people done, even, have done professionals during COVID, obviously, because they couldn't go to recording studios. At home, make sure you find, a small space, ideally, no windows, ideally with a carpet instead of, wood flooring or that sort of thing, to avoid echoing. And then there are a lot of different types of microphones that you can use and that you can, easily order online. I'm happy to recommend a few afterwards if anyone wants to ask. And then obviously to find a way for, editing, you can use some sound engineers. Obviously, we have a team of sound engineers, but you can also try doing it by yourself. Obviously, the quality might vary. There are programs like Anchor. And then the next step is obviously uploading your audio to a hosting platform. There are many different hosting platforms. Libsyn, for example, is the one we use. And then all you really have to do, that kind of generates what's called an RSS feed, and that will then disseminate the podcast into the various platforms. Some of the most well-known and popular, obviously, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts. There are really a lot of different ones. And I think what's really interesting is that a lot of these platforms are investing in their own original content creation as well, like Spotify originals, same with Apple recently. So I think that's kind of another indicator that the market is growing, I guess.
Perfect. I have a question from the chat room. Is the appetite for podcasts an elitist trend? or the reflection of the fact that people tend to go to media that reflects interests for a more specific field?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by elitist. I mean, I think obviously we can all agree that podcasts are quite democratic and available for all. But if you mean niche, then yes, I think that one of the strong points of podcasts is that they are, they tend to be thematic. So, you have, as I said before, a podcast about design or a podcast about sports. And so there, I think that one of the values is that listeners, as I said before, are very engaged because it is a topic that they're very passionate about. Often they establish very strong connections with the presenter of the show as well. And so I think it kind of maybe ties into what Lizzy was saying about personal brands. And I think with podcasts, hosts can really craft sort of their own personal brand because it is so intimate and immediate. It's, the other person's voice being listened to directly.
Perfect. And I have another question from the chat room. How does the market look like in Greece?
Yeah, so this is another question I get asked a lot. Unfortunately, there aren't any statistics available, wider statistics. I do have some, evidence from other Mediterranean countries, for example, Italy, France, Germany, where it's growing a lot over the past few years. One thing also to note is that we don't have, we have, for example, on iTunes, if you go into Greek iTunes, you can see the rankings of podcasts, but the only person who can actually see how many downloads or listens that podcast has gotten is the actual person who uploads it. And so, with our podcasts, we definitely have those figures. I'm not able to divulge specific figures just because a lot of what we do is for, as I said, companies and other brands. So you might have to get that information directly from them. But we are definitely seeing a big growth trajectory.
I have a question that I think that represents a lot of us. If you have any podcast recommendations to add to our to listen lists.
Yes, I definitely have a lot. I did mention a few before. If you want, you can email me, whoever wants, at dk@podcastproject.gr. I'm sure you'll be able to find my details through these guys somehow. But off the top of my head, one of my favorite podcasts is How to Fail with Elizabeth Day. It's this British journalist who interviews people from different fields and different walks of life. And it's kind of going back to what I said before. She's found a really clever way of framing those interviews, because what she does is she asks her guests to choose one or maybe multiple actually failures of theirs. So you might have a very successful business person talking about how, when they were in high school, or, they failed in high school, they didn't pass their exams, or, they had one business before the business that became successful that went bankrupt. And the whole kind of message of the podcast is that failure is a good thing and it kind of makes us stronger. So that, I'd say, is a podcast I listen to a lot. Then, of course, The Daily by the New York Times, Today in Focus by The Guardian. And obviously our podcasts, please do check them out.
The English version.
Yeah, so we have one podcast so far in English, which we did it's a travel and culture podcast called We'll Always Have Athens, and it's in collaboration with the municipality of Athens. So it was quite interesting because they asked us to do that during lockdown. And I think it goes back to what Lizzy was saying about creative ways, doing things during a crisis. So for us, it was a great opportunity because the brief from them was, we really want to find a way of engaging with our audiences across the world at a time when they can't travel to Athens. And so we were tasked with producing this 6-part episode series with interviews of sort of famous, let's say, personalities around the world, talking about their favorite things about the city of Athens. So please do check that out if you want.
We will do for sure. And I have a last question. If you think that podcasts are the next big thing in content marketing for brands, or for content for another format of content for media organizations, because we noticed that
Hello?
I think we lost you there, Mariana.
Yeah. Okay, I might continue answering that question because I think I kind of understood what the question was. But basically, I think, yeah, there's a lot of value for media organizations and brands in using podcasts, just because you can really tailor. Sorry. I'm not sure if can everyone hear me?
I can hear you clearly, Daphne. I think it's Mariana who has an issue.
Okay, I might just mute Mariana a second.
Yeah.
And a lot of brands, hear me now?
Okay, I was just, Mariana, I just started.
Now?
Yes, I'm just going to start answering the question. Sorry. So basically, as I said earlier, I think there is a lot of value for brands and media organizations. I think for brands, the value is, as I said, you can really tailor podcasts to engage your audience, and it's a great way of sort of communicating your brand values. For example, you know, we've seen companies like Nike investing in, you know, they've started up a health and fitness podcast. Or we've had, you know, I think it was Virgin, the aviation company, that started a podcast about the future of travel. And I think the great thing is that you can sort of subtly communicate your brand messages, but also offering actual content. So it's almost like an advertorial, let's say. It's kind of a mix between advertising and editorial. And as I said, one of the interesting things about podcasts is that there are statistics that show, you know, that compared to other mediums, you know, other branded content, let's say YouTube or other things, there is a really high rate of listening, of actual duration that people invest in listening to these podcasts. So I think it's something like, I mean, I've got some figures in front of me, but, you know, an average rate of a branded podcast listen through that's, you know, 30-minute podcast is 28 minutes, which is incredible. And you struggle to find that kind of listenership and engagement in other mediums. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying about that, you know, I guess, lean in moment, you know, the fact that it's not just, you know, something popping up on YouTube. It's not, you know, something in the background in the radio station. It's something that, you know, people have consciously made a choice to go into and sort of listen to. And with media organizations, if you mean things like traditional media, then I think one of the values, I think, is the value that you can learn from podcasts about unfolding your story bit by bit and building a narrative and kind of going more towards a model of thoughtful content creation and kind of getting away from fast news, and also, you know, not underestimating your audience's intelligence, I guess, and the fact that they do want something that's a bit more polished, a bit more thought out. And I think the important things with podcasts, and particularly branded podcasts maybe, is that you don't really build your audience overnight. So I think consistency and putting in the effort over, let's say, a period of months rather than just, you know, releasing a couple of episodes here and there is really important.
Thank you so much for all these advices, for the suggestions. It was very cool. And last but not least, we will discuss about data storytelling. As studies show that data-driven stories can drive change by engaging audience and helping them understand what they previously could not. But it's a question that how we can tell a story with data. And we have with us Fotini Vroiki, a research lead at MediaWatt from Cyprus, in order to explain us what data storytelling mean and the importance of this narrative and maybe how we can do it. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, guys. So just to say a bit about myself first, I'm the research lead of MediaWatt, which is an NGO in Cyprus. We're based in Cyprus. We do work with communities, and we work with also marginalized communities in London, such as refugees, and helping them engage with telling their stories in their own ways by using different kinds of media. That media can be either even like simple like magazines or writing stories, or even like creating films. And I'm also right now I'm not actually in Cyprus, I'm in London, because I have like my second hat is I'm teaching at a university, which is and I'm teaching on data, and my expertise is in data storytelling. And so hi from gloomy London. It's been really rainy today. I feel really kind of jealous of you. So I didn't prepare any slides either. So Lizzy has been the most organized of us all here. But I'll talk a bit about what is data storytelling, what we mean by it, and basically what kind of new and innovative thing it brings to our the ways we communicate. So first of all, I think it's important, as Daphne and Lizzy stressed, that the ability to tell stories is really important when we're using digital means, but also when we're talking about ourselves, as Lizzy said. And obviously in today's data world, maybe data-driven world even, it's even more important for us to communicate through data and through visualizations that are make that data more meaningful. So for the best part of, let's say, of the last 50 years, data has been mostly entrusted in at least a couple of groups, some privileged groups. We think of, for example, executives of business executives who needed data to manage their businesses and to do what they needed to do for the business to survive. And we also think about the second group of people who have access to data that are data specialists, specifically people who are analyzing data, and where they usually have titles such as a business analyst or a statistician or an economist. And obviously a lot of us know about like accountants, and the accountants who look into the data of each company, and then they gather that data and analyze it, and then do reports for each business or institution, and then they share it with the management. And everyone else of us, and everyone else who was part of this company or institutions and organizations, didn't really get any exposure to this data, or the way this data was shared or manipulated or was directed. So our general sense of what the data world is and what kind of data we navigate and we create in our lives is basically very basic. But now I think we've come to a point, especially through the COVID-19 crisis, where we see data become much more pervasive in our everyday lives. So we are looking, we expose ourselves to like facts and figures and charts and so on. And we've seen that happening in the news in the past couple of 6 or 7 months. I say a couple of months because nothing makes sense anymore in this time frame. But yeah, we see like charts, visualizations that try to explain to us how the virus is spreading, or how it is global and how it is local, and how we can compare the impact of it in big economies and smaller economies, and the social and cultural impact that it has. And every one of us has been in at least trying to understand some of those charts and some of those bars and tables that tell us how many people have the virus today and what that does mean for my city. So this kind of explosive data storytelling process that we're part of right now it's happening just because we are increasingly basically connected with a global world. And obviously just because we exist in this urgent time, the urgency of the pandemic, and understanding the pandemic's data has become everyone's responsibility. So we are responsible for understanding this data. So as data storytellers, I think the most important thing right now, when we talk about the virus, but when we talk about any other aspect of our lives right now, is to strive to tell a good story, to communicate, and not just inform. And in a lot of ways, when we talk about data storytelling, when people ask me what is data storytelling, I always say that there are two words that we link data storytelling with, and one is obviously data, and the other is communication. And we often use these two words interchangeably. We talk about information as data, and it's not exactly the same thing. Because data, we can think of data as facts, as charts, as the raw material of the story that we want to tell. And the story is essentially the communication. So a communication is getting through to people and managing to tell the story to someone and that someone can understand what you're trying to tell them and what kind of information you want to convey to them. So obviously both data and communication involve a receiver and a sender, but then when you get to talk about communication per se, you're talking about making that information and that data available to someone who would never understand data in its as a raw material. So we're talking about it in terms of context. You have to provide the context, you have to provide the meaning, and help that person understand what you're trying to convey to them in a much simpler way than providing them with numbers and charts. So in general, I think the recipe for data storytelling and whenever I talk about it, I tell people that it's all about like 3 elements. We have 3 elements in data storytelling, and obviously the first one is data. And obviously data is everywhere right now. We create it, machines create it. Everything can be counted as data. And a lot of us say that data is like air that exists everywhere. And it has become impossible to progress in the world without data right now. And a good data storyteller can extract the data when necessary and explain the data concepts in layman terms, so in very simplified ways that will make that accessible to everyone and provide the information as a story that helps people see the bottom line, the exact meaning of what we want them to understand. And then the major thing of this kind of story that we want to create is to, and I think Lizzy also mentioned this, is to be persuasive, to manage to try to make people understand exactly what we want them to do and be memorable. So let people remember us, and basically for them not to forget what we actually try to convey to them. And obviously a good story is always engaging. It has to be interesting. And that brings me to the second key thing and the second key ingredient of data storytelling, which is telling interesting stories. And obviously, we all love a good story. It makes for excellent entertainment. Although telling a story can never be as compelling as a movie or probably as a podcast, a data story is not as interesting as a complete news story. Formulas to traditional storytelling and stories that we tell in other formats and other mediums. It has a beginning, it has a middle, it has an end. And when we are thinking about visualizing and telling a story through data, we're thinking about what will draw people in and what will keep people into the story to reach to the end and manage for them to get to the results that we want them to understand. And it needs to be obviously presented with without bias. I think about, as Lizzy said, we have to think about what kind of feelings people will have when we share a story, apply the empathy that is needed for each kind of visualization, if it's a visualization or if it's a story that wants to tell different kind of data stories, and obviously provide the context to the audience to understand these kind of stories that we want to share. And finally, the third ingredient, again, as Lizzy said, and Daphne touched as well, is making people feel like that they are part of this story, provide and create emotions to someone. That emotion can be excitement, sometimes it can be fear, it can be interest. Whatever the emotion is, it plays a significant role in helping us convey the point of our story. And a good data storyteller always considers the power of the visualization that they're creating and what we are trying to identify through the data. And obviously a good data story, an interesting story, and a story that has and manages to create and produce emotions is a story that keeps a lasting impression in people, and that they will go away and then remember it and come back to it ever and ever again. So I think that's my main point. I don't know if you have questions, Mariana.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you, but the girls can also reply. It's a very interesting question. One of the reasons disinformation is successful all over the world is the fact that fiction is always more appealing than the reality. It's more of a story. How can we increase the appeal of reality and factual information to compete with those pushing conspiracies and lies seeking to mislead us?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
You, because you talked about facts, and I would like to hear your opinion about
I think
that.
it's really interesting. Obviously, when you're talking about what happens right now with data, like visualizations, and how misinformation and disinformation is spread much widely and much faster than facts and the truth, we get to honestly consider whether we're doing it correctly, whether people who are actually creating the visualizations of the truth and the facts are doing it in the same ways as the ones who are basically spreading misinformation. And I don't think it's necessarily just attached to the ways we do the data storytelling when it comes to truth and facts. I think sensationalism, which is obviously creating different sorts of emotions to people, and disinformation is creating those negative emotions that become much more easily spread than facts. And facts obviously are boring. I mean, let's be true to ourselves. Facts are boring, numbers are boring. And that's why we're trying to make these stories much more compelling, because we know that they are boring. But also, I think it comes to data literacy and the question of whether people have the literacy to understand what is fact and what is fiction. And obviously, it's a much bigger kind of discussion. But we in MediaBot, we do a lot of work on media literacy and data literacy and how we can approach both young populations, but also senior populations, to teach them how they can like navigate through misinformation and what is true and what is fiction. And I think it has to do with how fast technology has developed and how little we've invested in teaching people how to understand these technologies and the data, and how data is collected, analyzed, and presented, basically. I'm gonna stop here, and maybe others can join.
If I can add, I recently was involved, or kind of got a glimpse of the extremist communication. And I completely agree that one point is about data or like literacy, like how we consume, and the people who don't really know how to do that. And I think, to be provocative, what I've noticed that we as good people, the people who are telling the right stories, right, we are sometimes lazy. You know, we're don't really bother because we know that things are true, and we kind of have some kind of a competitive edge, or we think we have it because, you know, kind of we should have it because we're telling the right thing and you should believe that. So we stop trying to make it understandable. So I agree that there is a literacy issue, but the problem comes that extremists also use the needs of the people we as the right ones don't use. We don't deal with them, or we don't communicate that why we're not doing it in a manner that people would understand. We stick to our complicated words, to our theories or our data, you know, that we know what's true, and we kind of expect compliancy. And we are binded by the ethical, we are binded by ethical rules, morality. But in its essence, I mean, if we look at the Hollywood movies, we could do our stories just the same, and the Hollywood uses to promote policies and kind of viewpoints. They are driven by money, so you know that's one thing, and we can kind of complain why Hollywood is telling the stories they are. But the extremists or this fake news, they come from the needs of people, and they use that. But we don't. We are lazy in that one. I know from my part, I know what I should do in marketing and communication, but oftentimes it's enough for me. For some things are enough for me, so I'm not really trying anymore. So I'm taking the blame myself. But we are lazy sometimes, and we kind of claim that we need to teach the literacy instead of kind of trying to meet them in halfway, not saying that somebody needs to learn something more, but either trying to solve the issue and focusing on solving the issues and communicating normally. I mean, we all know the regular rules of communication, and it somehow seems so difficult to apply them, but this is me being provocative.
Yeah. As you know, digital communication network starts with the premise that in order to be effective in the new information space, digital communicators need to talk to each other and to work together. Do you think that methods or techniques that are used in digital marketing, for example, are transferable in journalistic storytelling or in communication for social causes? What can journalists can learn from content creators, from digital marketeers? Lizzy, Fodini?
I could continue on, but maybe if somebody else wants to add, maybe somebody from the crowd actually wants to add something.
I think no, I don't. I cannot see any raised hand. So continue.
Daphne, do you want to say something, because you are the content creator here?
Yeah, I mean,
journalist.
I think it kind of, not to repeat myself, but I think it goes back to what I was saying about kind of getting away from the idea of fast content and guerrilla tactics and all these, which can be very effective if they're done in the right way, but kind of going back to producing more thoughtful content, unfolding a story slowly. And I think I was really struck, Lizzy, by what you said in the beginning, that when you're thinking about marketing, you know, stop thinking just about marketing, but also, you know, the actual content that you're putting out there. Think about it in content terms, I guess. So I think that's one thing that can be learned. And also, again, just the idea of patience and building consistency in whatever it is that you're putting out, be it a bar of quality that is consistent, or just things like allowing time for your content to be discovered, and putting it out there on a regular basis as kind of a long-term strategic commitment.
Perfect. How COVID-19 does affect digital storytelling? I mean, we are on the next step after COVID-19. Can we learn something new from all this period?
Yeah, I mean, from a podcast perspective, it was quite interesting because in the beginning there was quite a slump in podcast listenership globally, because a lot of people listen to podcasts on their commutes, which obviously stopped during COVID and everyone was at home. Now it's kind of gone back up again because people have found ways of integrating it into their lives at home as well. So I guess one thing we can learn is, just to keep going. Podcasters didn't stop putting their content out there. Thankfully, it is a medium that is kind of blessed with being able to, you can record remotely, and in a way, it's even more valuable now that maybe companies, organizations, groups overall can't have those in-person meetings, and so it's really important to keep that connection up. But I think what I learned is to kind of obviously have, an ear to the ground and be realistic and know that your plans might be affected, but also just keep going because things do bounce back up.
I would also add that one of the positive things that I noticed is that very quickly, at least in Estonia, there were so many tutorials to use digital channels, from Zoom to different kind of teaching portals, to Coursera. There were opportunities to learn new things. So when for years we've been telling that digital is important and you kind of need those skills, all of a sudden all the tutorials came like easily followed, for different generations, for different groups. So this is the positive side, that there are now more opportunities to learn and also to practice, because you are forced to do that. So you it's not that I learned how to use this Zoom, and then maybe in a year I might do one Zoom call, but now you're kind of forced. So you have practice and training at the same time. So that's really good. For me, what is a bit of a boring thing, and I think a negative side, is that there are so many kind of template contents, especially e-commerce and these e-learning things, that they're just copy-based. So for me, it takes a lot of time to find good content. So again, I agree with Daphne said that, if you're a quality content creator, please hold on to this and please trust your content and just continue making it better, because there is so much crap out there. And you need to give the audience a bit of a time, or just find better ways to reach them. And this is, again, the way you build your story, so that the right people, not more people, but the right people will get there. So it will spread. So I think this is also important.
And just to add to that, because Lizzy, that you said that we need, COVID, I think, also allowed us to understand and basically get a really grasp the limitations of digital storytelling, and how, yes, we can do a lot through digital. We can tell our stories online, but there are some stuff that communication has to be done outside of the digital space, and it has to be face to face, and it has to be either or through a completely different channel, and sometimes a podcast, and sometimes it can be something else.
Speaking of limitations, as I have another question from chat room, and I think that Fotini mentioned already in her speech, how do you appeal to different generations with storytelling? considering the fact that there are significant differences between generations in terms of digital literacy. Is a generational approach needed?
Yes. Can I speak? I've gone to half Zoom, so I can't actually go into the chat room anymore, but can you see and hear me?
Yeah.
It's Valerie here. I work in intergenerational learning, and that's really is a question for me. So could you put my video on?
I cannot moderate now, but we can hear you. So you
hear
can.
me. Okay. Well, the point about why I joined this was because I thought it was going to be more about stories and less about marketing. But the marketing was very interesting. But intergenerationally, we can actually work better now in some ways because of the virus. It seems paradoxical when we can't get together in the way that we used to. And older people like me, I'm in my 80th year, we cannot actually go and visit our families anymore. So we are using the digital technology. I love Zoom now. I never used it until the pandemic appeared. I can talk to my grandchildren directly, and they can see me and hear me using this equipment. We can also use this equipment to record stories. We can film. We can get people to via the internet. I'm working on a project with a teacher in Uganda to create digital stories, and we're doing it via FaceTime. We can speak to one another side by side, and we film that side by side so that we are creating stories. So actually, the pandemic has given us an insight into new ways of using the technology that we didn't think of before. And by the way, if you think all older people are not on the internet, it simply isn't true. Remember, it was my generation that invented the bloody stuff.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You're so awesome, Valerie. What I've always wondered about this generation differences, sometimes I don't agree with that. It's just because, for example, if I can choose, I would not use technology at all. In my work, I do social media as little as possible. And I don't want that. I love face-to-face, interaction. Or I also love to be more individual, and I have a very small group of people I talk to. And I think that's also the case with different generations. We can talk about different generations and what they've grown up with. And my niece can teach me about Snapchat and TikTok, which I don't know, things I don't know. It's like life for them, or like breathing, the skills they grow up with. So of course, in that part, it's always the case if we access to people who need certain kind of communication channels, whatever they are, for whatever reasons they are, and how we do that. But it also comes down to people in person, like, different generations still have the same type of people. Some want it, some don't want it. Some want to have the messages via emails, some want it through phone, and then you probably know friends who never take their phone because they just don't like calling people, or Facebook, etc.
I hardly ever use the phone because I live in a village that has no phone signal. So I use it to take photographs. But you see, last year I spoke in conferences in Paris, all over Europe. I went abroad 6 times. This year I've been abroad more often. And tomorrow I'll be speaking in Nigeria, which is amazing. One couldn't do that. And what's more, not only does it take up less time, it also doesn't cost anything, which is
Exactly
amazing. We can be together in a more global sense than we ever could before this pandemic. It wasn't that the technology wasn't there, it's just that we were not ready for it. The pandemic has given us this need that we must still maintain what we're trying to do in our lives, And we can only do so by using the technology, which is available free, gratis, and for us all. It's wonderful. I'm going to log off to you now, but if anyone would like to get in touch with me, Learn with Grandma is an international network with there's Facebook groups. And oh, the previous speaker, I'm so sorry you don't like social media. I think it's the most wonderful communication tool that was ever invented. Learn with Grandma could not have gone around the world in the way that it has without Facebook, believe me. There was no way. I only started it because after I became very ill and retired properly, I had a cardiac arrest following an open heart surgery. And the surgeon said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Retire." And she said, "No, you're the wrong type. Start another project, and it'll keep you mentally and physically active." It's working, believe me. I'm still here and I ain't going yet. I'm going to leave now. It's lovely to meet you all. And I do hope you'll get in touch via the dreaded social media of Facebook.
Valerie, DCN loves social media, for sure. Lizzy does not love social media. I would like to thank all our wonderful ladies for this inspiring virtual discussion and all the participants, and also Valerie. This event, I would like to remind you that this event was co-organized by World Learning and the Digital Communication Network Southeast Europe Hub, which is supported by the US Department of State Office of Citizen Exchanges. In order to stay updated, you can follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can find the handles Digicomnet and DCN SE Hub in order to get all the notifications. Thank you all for participating. Thank you, girls, very much.
Thank you, Mariana.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.